What would you do if your loyal canine partner stopped in his tracks, stared at a locked hospital door, and his bark led you to a child no one even knew was missing? No one noticed the dog at first, not really. At Hopewell Medical Center, a canine unit walking alongside an officer didn't turn many heads, especially not one as well-trained and composed as Shadow, a broad-shouldered German shepherd with deep, intelligent eyes and a calm stride. He moved like a shadow always beside his handler, never ahead, never distracted. To the hospital staff, he was just part of another routine patrol, but that Tuesday afternoon, something changed. Shadow suddenly stopped in his tracks, his entire body stiff as stone, his ears forward, tail straight. His handler, Officer Ava Carter, noticed the shift immediately. After nearly 5 years together on patrol, she could read Shadow like a book. But this was different. "Shadow," she said gently, tugging the leash slightly. He didn't move. Then came the bark. Not just a bark, it was deep, raw, urgent. The kind of bark that vibrated through your chest and made your spine go cold. It wasn't a warning, it was a scream. "Room 207, Ava whispered, glancing at the door just feet away. Shadow barked again, louder this time. Patients in nearby rooms stirred. A nurse dropped her clipboard in the hallway. The atmosphere shifted in an instant, like a storm cloud had rolled in overhead. A young nurse stepped closer, her brows knitting together. "Officer Carter, that room, it's supposed to be empty." Ava looked at her. "Empty? It's under renovation. No one's been in there for over a week." But Shadow kept barking. Loud, ferocious, relentless. Ava crouched beside him, resting her palm on his tense shoulders. "Easy, boy. What is it?" Shadow's barking didn't slow. He scratched at the floor toward the door, nose to the gap at the bottom, growling Nolo, primal. Ava's instincts flared. Shadow had never behaved like this before. Not even on raids, not even during their toughest calls. She reached for her radio. "This is Officer Carter. I need immediate access to room 207. Possible security breach. Repeat, possible security breach." Her voice was steady, but her heart thudded in her chest. Moments later, Clara, one of the senior nurses, rushed down the corridor with a master key in shaking hands. "I swear to you, no one's supposed to be in there," she murmured, eyes wide. "The contractors haven't even started." Ava took the key from her gently. "Stay back." She stood, her hand on her weapon, the leash firm in her other hand. Shadow stood ready beside her, still growling, his body trembling with intensity. The key turned in the lock with a click. Ava pushed the door open. What hit her first was the air, thick, stale, like it hadn't been circulated in days. Dust motes floated in slants of weak afternoon light. The blinds were drawn, casting eerie shadows across the floor. The room looked untouched, no signs of renovation equipment, no contractor tools. And then she saw it. In the far corner, barely visible in the gloom, was a small form huddled. Still. Ava's breath caught in her throat. A child. She stepped in slowly, Shadow creeping ahead of her, his body now low, ears tucked, tail down. The boy, because it was a boy, looked no older than 9 or 10. He was curled up on the cold linoleum floor, wrapped in what looked like a soiled hospital sheet. His face was ghostly pale, his eyes wide, glassy, unfocused, tracked Ava as she approached. There were faint red marks on his wrists, like he'd been tied. Shadow whined, a soft, heart-breaking sound as he inched forward, slowly laying down beside the boy, resting his head near him, like a guardian standing watch. Ava knelt beside the child, heart breaking in her chest. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe now. My name's Ava." "This is Shadow. We're here to help." The boy didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. But he wasn't alone anymore. Back in the hallway, chaos erupted. An emergency pediatric team was called. Nurses rushed to prepare the trauma unit. Ava stayed with the boy until help arrived, her hand never leaving his, Shadow refusing to move. No one could explain how a child had ended up in a locked, unused room for over a week. No missing persons reports matched his appearance. No one had seen him enter. There were no signs of forced entry, and yet he was there, alive. Barely. Saved only because a dog barked. Later that night, as Ava sat in the quiet of her car, Shadow resting in the back seat, she played the moment over and over in her mind. That sound, that bark, that unexplainable instinct. And in that moment, she realized something. Shadow hadn't just followed a scent. He'd followed something deeper, something human. And whatever had happened in room 207 was only the beginning. The room had fallen into a hush. Even after the medical team had rushed the boy away on a stretcher, even after the hallway cleared and the murmurs faded, Officer Ava Carter remained standing just outside room 207. Her hand still rested on the doorknob, as if letting go would somehow erase the moment. Shadow, her canine partner, sat quietly at her feet, no barking now, no tension in his frame. Just a steady gaze toward the empty hallway, ears slightly back, eyes somber. The adrenaline had passed, but the weight of what they had found lingered like smoke in the air. Ava looked down at him. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. Shadow didn't move, but she knew the answer. 5 years, that's how long they had worked together. When Ava first met Shadow, he wasn't the composed, disciplined canine everyone knew today. He was just another problem dog at the county shelter or rescue with a history, a failed adoption, anxiety issues. They almost wrote him off entirely. But Ava had seen something. There was intelligence behind his fear. Loyalty buried beneath the growls, and when no other officer wanted to take the time, she had asked for him. It hadn't been easy. Shadow didn't trust people, not at first. He flinched at sudden movements, barked at loud noises. Took weeks before he would even take a treat from her hand. But little by little, that began to change. He started waiting for her at the kennel gate, started nudging her hand with his nose, started sitting when she asked, no treats required. Eventually, they became inseparable. At the precinct, everyone joked that Shadow was Ava's shadow, always a step behind her, always watching. They patrolled the city together, assisted in drug busts, cleared buildings, even visited schools to meet kids. Shadow became a favorite in the pediatric wing of Hopewell Medical Center, where his soft demeanor soothed anxious children waiting for surgery or checkups. So when the assignment came in that morning, routine security sweep at Hopewell, Ava hadn't thought twice. It was supposed to be just another quiet Tuesday. But as they reached the East Wing, something changed. Shadow stiffened. It happened fast, too fast. 1 second he was walking at Ava's side, the next his head jerked toward a closed door. Room 207, his ears shot up, nose twitching, muscles tense. Then the bark, so loud, so raw. Ava hadn't heard him bark like that in years. Not even during narcotics raids. Not even when they chased armed suspects through alleyways. It wasn't aggression, it was urgency, like he had seen something no one else could. Back in the present, Ava crouched beside Shadow and ran her fingers along his fur. "You saved him," she whispered. A nurse passed by and paused. It was Clara, the one who had handed Ava the key. She looked pale, her hands still trembling slightly. "They're stabilizing the boy now," she said softly. "He hasn't spoken. Doesn't seem to respond much. Poor thing. He was just alone." Ava nodded. "Do we know his name?" Clara shook her head. "Not yet. No ID. Nothing on file. It's like he just appeared." Ava exhaled slowly. Her mind was spinning with questions. How had a child ended up in that room? Who put him there? Why wasn't it on any log or report? And most haunting of all, why was Shadow the only one who knew something was wrong? That night, back at her apartment, Ava poured a bowl of water for Shadow and collapsed onto the couch. Her body ached, but her mind wouldn't rest. She pulled out her notebook, the one she used to track anything odd during patrols, and opened a fresh page. Room 207, incident log. She began to write. Time of barking, approx. 2:43 p.m. Door labeled as under renovation. No official work order submitted for 207 Nurse Clara. Room blocked off since last week. Child. Approx. 9-10 years old, white male, malnourished, unresponsive. Physical signs, restrained wrists, dirtied hospital blanket. No match in missing persons database. Initial search. Shadow behavior. Uncharacteristic agitation, barking, pawing at door. She stopped writing. Her hand hovered over the paper. There was one more thing she needed to note, a truth she couldn't explain, a gut feeling that refused to leave. She wrote in bold letters. Shadow sensed something human, not physical, emotional. She looked up at her partner. Shadow lay near the front door, ears twitching slightly as he dreamed, his body no longer tense. For now, he could rest. Ava knew he had felt something that afternoon, something that didn't come from a scent. It came from pain, from fear, from the presence of a broken, terrified child on the other side of a locked door. And somehow, Shadow had heard it. The next morning, Ava was back at the hospital. She checked in with the pediatric wing. The boy, still unnamed, had been moved to a private room, placed under psychological and medical observation. Ava asked if she could sit with him for a while. The nurse nodded. He hasn't said a word, but maybe you'll get through. Shadow padded quietly into the room first. The boy sat up in bed, knees to chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. His eyes flicked to the dog, and for the first time since his rescue, he blinked. Ava noticed. Shadow didn't move closer. He simply lay down at the foot of the bed, head on his paws, breathing slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. The boy stared at him. Ava sat in the chair beside the bed, her voice soft. "This is Shadow. He found you." No response. But a moment later, the boy moved his fingers slightly. Just a twitch, like he wanted to reach out, like he didn't want to be alone anymore. Ava smiled. Shadow wagged his tail once. They didn't know his name yet, they didn't know who hurt him, but thanks to a bark in the hallway, they had found him. And something told Ava this was only the beginning. It wasn't the darkness that got to her. Officer Ava Carter had seen her share of bloodied alleys and abandoned homes, the kinds of places that creaked and whispered at night, that smelled like fear and hopelessness. But something about room 207 at Hopewell Medical Center was different. It wasn't what was visible. It was what wasn't. She stood just inside the doorway that day, with Shadow beside her, his breathing slow but alert. Her flashlight beam cut through the heavy air, revealing a room that should have been empty. No sheets on the bed, no equipment, no signs of construction like the hospital claimed. But in the far corner, almost invisible in the shadows, was a child, a boy, small, still, wrapped in what looked like an old hospital blanket. His knees were pulled tight to his chest, and his arms wrapped around them like he was holding himself together. His hair was matted, his face pale, but his eyes, those wide, haunted eyes, they were very much awake. Ava knelt down slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Hey there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Ava. I'm a police officer, and this is Shadow. He's here to help too." No response. Just that gaze, distant and blank, like the boy wasn't sure if she was real. Shadow let out a low whine. He lay down on his belly, crawling forward an inch at a time. He stopped just short of the boy and rested his head on the cold linoleum floor. That did something. The boy blinked, once, then twice. Then his lips trembled. Ava moved in, gently. Slowly. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Still nothing. But now, tears began to form in the boy's eyes, quiet, fragile tears that slid down his cheeks with no sound. They got him out minutes later. Nurses rushed in with blankets, a wheelchair, medical kits. Ava stayed close as he was wheeled down the hallway, Shadow padding silently beside him. No one had seen this boy before. No one even knew he existed. And no one had an answer for how he got into a room that was supposed to be under lock and key. 2 hours later, Ava sat in a back conference room with the hospital's head of security, a nurse supervisor, and a detective from the local precinct. Her notepad was open. Shadow lay at her feet, eyes closed but ears still twitching at every sound. The detective, a seasoned woman named Ruiz, tapped her pen on the table. "You're telling me there are no reports of missing children matching his age or appearance?" "None that we can find," the nurse replied. "And we checked the entire hospital log system. No child matching that description was admitted." "Ever?" Ava leaned forward. "What about construction logs? Work orders?" "This room was listed as under renovation." Security chief frowned. "That's the thing. The room was marked for renovation. But the paperwork never got processed. It's like someone labeled it that way. But no team was assigned." Ava's jaw clenched. "So it was an empty room." "Accessible and unmonitored." Ruiz nodded grimly. "Perfect place to hide someone." They reviewed surveillance footage next. Camera feeds from every wing of the hospital. For 3 days prior, nothing suspicious. Just patients. Nurses, cleaning staff. Then Ava paused the video. "Back it up," she said, pointing at the timestamp. "There, that hallway. Near the stairwell." The footage was grainy, low res, but a figure appeared. A man in a janitor's uniform, walking slowly, leading a smaller figure beside him, one that moved uncertainly, head down. It was the boy. Noah. That's what they called him now. He hadn't said his name, but one of the nurses had begun using it softly when talking to him, and the boy didn't object. It stuck. It gave him an identity, something he hadn't had in days. And now, the man in the video had a name too. Frank Delaney. He had worked as a contracted janitor at Hopewell for almost 6 years. Quiet, reliable, no write-ups. No complaints. But when police arrived at his apartment that evening, they found it empty. Drawers open. Clothes gone, his locker at the hospital cleared out. He was gone. And Ava's gut twisted. Because whoever Frank Delaney really was had taken a child, hidden him in a hospital room, and vanished without leaving a trace. And if it hadn't been for Shadow's bark, Noah might never have been found. Back in the pediatric recovery room, Noah lay curled beneath a warm blanket. His small hands gripped the fabric tightly, and his eyes remained trained on the door. But Shadow was there on the floor, close enough to touch, just watching over him. The room was quiet. Then, without a word, Noah slowly reached out his hand and let it rest gently on Shadow's neck. Ava watched from the doorway, her chest tightening. That simple touch it was the first voluntary movement he'd made toward anyone. Later, when she sat down beside him, she tried again. "You're safe now, Noah. No one's going to hurt you." He didn't answer, but this time he didn't look away either. As night fell over the city, Ava found herself standing again outside room 207. The hallway was empty now. The door had been sealed off with caution tape. But the memory lingered. The stale air, the silence, the child huddled alone in the dark. And then, that bark. That one bark that had shattered the stillness and changed everything. She knelt beside Shadow and scratched gently behind his ears. "You did more than your job," she murmured. "You saw what none of us could." Shadow leaned against her, tail giving a soft thump against the tile. They still didn't know why Frank Delaney had done it. They didn't know how long he had been planning it or if Noah had been the only one. But one thing was now terrifyingly clear. Room 207 hadn't been empty, and Shadow had known it all along. The room was warm. Soft yellow light glowed from a lamp by the bedside, casting long shadows across the floor. A small tray sat untouched on the nearby table. Chicken broth, applesauce, crackers. But the boy under the blanket hadn't eaten. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. Just lay there, curled on his side, his arms tightly wrapped around his knees, as if to protect what little of himself he had left. Noah. That was the name the nurses had gently started calling him. He hadn't offered a name himself, and when asked directly, he simply looked away. It was Ava who noticed how he seemed to flinch every time someone said kid or boy. But when one nurse, Clara, called out, "Hey, sweetheart, Noah's soup is ready," the child didn't move. But he didn't flinch either. That was enough. In a world that had erased him, Ava was determined to give him back his name, even if it was borrowed. Ava Carter sat quietly by the door. She didn't speak. Didn't try to coax him again. She just watched him. And every now and then her eyes drifted to Shadow, her loyal canine partner, who lay curled near the foot of the bed like a sentry. Shadow had barely left Noah's side since the rescue. Whenever they moved the boy even for scans or routine vitals, Shadow followed, padding silently behind the stretcher like he was tethered to the child's heartbeat. The hospital staff, usually cautious around working dogs, had made an exception. Shadow, it seemed, had become an essential part of Noah's care. And Ava had no objections. Earlier that day, a social worker had stopped by. She carried a clipboard filled with intake forms and a gentle but concerned expression. Her name was Ms. Rayner, and her voice was kind, the kind that comes from seeing too much pain and not giving up on people anyway. She'd asked Ava to step outside. They stood in the hallway outside room 306. "No identification on the boy," Ms. Rayner said. "No birth records, no matches in the missing children database. We're running facial recognition against national databases, but so far, nothing." Ava crossed her arms, brow furrowed. "No one's reported him missing? Not a single inquiry. No parent, no guardian, not even a concerned teacher." It didn't make sense. A child, maybe 9 or 10 years old, hidden in a hospital room for nearly a week, and no one was looking for him. Ms. Rayner continued, "It's possible his birth wasn't registered properly. Maybe he's part of the foster system but slipped through the cracks. Or," she hesitated, "he could have been living off-grid with someone who didn't want him found." Ava's jaw clenched. "Like Frank Delaney, the janitor." The man caught on grainy footage leading Noah toward room 207, the man who had disappeared the moment police came knocking. Back in the room, Noah stirred slightly beneath the blanket. Ava rose from her chair and stepped closer, but not too close. She knelt near the bed, letting her presence speak louder than her words. "Hey," she said softly, "it's okay if you don't want to talk. I just want you to know you're not alone anymore." Shadow lifted his head at the sound of Ava's voice. Noah's eyes, once hollow, drifted toward the dog. Slowly, he reached out a thin, trembling hand and rested it on Shadow's back. Ava watched. She didn't cry, but she wanted to, because that small gesture meant trust. Later that evening, Ava walked down to the security office. She needed to see the footage again, needed to study every frame, every second, every movement. Maybe she'd missed something the first time. Maybe there was something in the shadows, some detail no one had caught. She fast-forwarded past hours of empty corridors and janitors pushing carts, then paused. There, 1:12 a.m. 2 nights before they found Noah, the camera feed showed the East Wing stairwell. A man in a janitor's uniform stepped into view, holding the hand of a small figure in a hoodie. The boy stumbled slightly and the man paused, kneeling as if to whisper something. Ava zoomed in. The face wasn't clear. The lens flared from the overhead lights, but the posture, the tension in the man's shoulders, the way he scanned the hallway, it was deliberate, calculated. Whoever Frank Delaney really was wasn't just some harmless janitor. The next morning, Ava brought Shadow with her again. They walked the hall slowly, past the pediatric recovery wing. Several nurses smiled and waved. Kids peeked out of their rooms to catch a glimpse of the dog. One little girl in a wheelchair even reached out to pet him. Shadow paused patiently, allowing her tiny hand to stroke his back. But his pace never changed. When they reached room 306, Shadow sat down by the door without being asked. He was waiting. Inside, Noah sat up in bed for the first time, still quiet, still cautious. But his eyes were clearer now, less fog, less fear. Ava opened the door and stepped in. Shadow followed. She sat at the edge of the bed, pulled out a small stuffed German Shepherd toy from her bag, the same kind they gave to kids during canine community events. She held it out. "This one's yours," she said. "He's got your back, just like Shadow." Noah took the toy, gripped it tightly, and for the first time since they found him, he nodded. Just once. But it was everything. Outside the window, sunlight poured across the courtyard. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze. The world, it seemed, was still spinning. But inside that room, in a quiet moment shared between a boy, a dog, and a woman who refused to give up, something was beginning to heal. They still didn't know his full name, still didn't know how long he'd been with Frank Delaney, but they knew this much. Noah was alive. He was safe. And thanks to Shadow, he was found. The grainy footage played on loop, same moment, same flicker of light, same chilling silence. Officer Ava Carter leaned forward in her chair at the Hopewell Medical Center security office. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the screen again. Behind her, Shadow lay curled near the desk, tail still, ears alert, just as focused as his handler. There it was, 1:12 a.m. Thursday. A tall man in a janitor's uniform steps into frame, and beside him, a child. The boy, Noah, looks small and fragile, even in shadow. He shuffles forward slowly, like his feet aren't used to walking long distances. The man glances behind them, his face half obscured by a ball cap. Then he does something strange. He kneels, leans in, and whispers something into Noah's ear. Noah nods once. Then they vanish into a blind spot right near room 207. Ava rewound again. Paused, zoomed. "You sure this is Frank Delaney?" she asked. Across the table, Detective Ruiz folded her arms. "Positive ID from staff and his employment records. But here's the thing, he clocked out at midnight." This footage is time-stamped an hour later. Ava's eyebrows knit together. "So, he came back?" Ruiz nodded. "Looks that way." "Used a secondary badge. Security missed it because it was deactivated the next day. Whoever helped him access the system knew what they were doing." Ava's stomach turned. This wasn't random. It was planned. Frank Delaney had been a janitor at Hopewell Medical for 6 years. No complaints, no red flags. Just another quiet guy who kept to himself. People said he was polite, dependable, the kind of man you wouldn't look at twice in the hallway. But Ava had learned long ago, monsters don't always wear warning signs. That afternoon, she and Ruiz drove to the apartment complex listed on Delaney's personnel file. Unit 3B, second floor. Far end. No one answered the door. The landlord let them in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and disuse. A pile of dishes sat crusted in the sink. The bed was unmade. A few empty takeout containers lay on the counter, but the closet? Empty. Drawers pulled out. No clothes, no toiletries. No laptop, no phone. The bathroom cabinet was stripped clean. "He ran," Ruiz said flatly. "He knew we'd come looking." "But how?" Ava asked. "How did he know so fast?" Ruiz didn't answer. But Ava's mind was already racing ahead. If Delaney had help on the inside, someone in security, IT, admin, this wasn't just a sick man hiding a boy. This could be something much bigger. Later that evening, Ava returned to the hospital. Shadow trotted beside her as always, drawing smiles from the nurses. But Ava wasn't there for patrol. She was there for Noah. Room 306 had become something of a sanctuary. Soft music played from a small speaker on the windowsill piano and wind chimes, the kind designed to soothe. A puzzle lay unfinished on a side table, and near the window, Noah sat in his bed, knees tucked, blanket across his lap. When Ava entered, his eyes immediately went to Shadow. The dog's ears perked, and his tail gave a slow, soft wag. Noah said nothing, but he reached out his hand in invitation. Shadow stepped forward. "Settled in," Ava smiled. She pulled a chair up beside the bed. "Noah," she said gently, "can I show you something?" He didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Ava pulled out a tablet and set it on the tray table. A paused frame from the security footage glowed on the screen. Delaney kneeling beside Noah in the hallway. Noah's body tensed. Ava placed her hand over his. "You don't have to say anything. I just want to know if this is the man who brought you here." Noah stared at the screen. His fingers tightened on the blanket. Then he nodded. "Once." Ava exhaled slowly. "Okay. Thank you." She was about to turn off the tablet when Noah surprised her. His lips parted, and in a voice barely louder than a breath, he whispered, "Uncle Frank." The words hung in the air. Shadow lifted his head. Ava froze. "Uncle Frank?" she asked softly. Noah nodded again. "He said he'd keep me safe. He said Mum and Dad didn't want me anymore." Ava's heart broke. She leaned in gently. "That's not true, sweetheart. That's not true at all." Tears welled in Noah's eyes. He looked away, but Ava didn't push further. She had what she needed. That night, she made a call. Run the name Frank Delaney against all known aliases, look for prior addresses, alternate IDs, anything, a beat. And flag any missing children cases that were closed without resolution, especially ones involving someone named Frank. Hours later, the call came back. Delaney had no criminal record, but a sealed family court file from 12 years ago revealed something chilling. He had once been a licensed foster caregiver. His certification had been revoked after 2 children in his care were removed for suspected neglect. No formal charges were filed, but he was blacklisted from future foster care placements. Ava stared at the report, then at Shadow, sleeping peacefully near her desk, and she thought of Noah. Alone in that dark hospital room, hidden behind a locked door, told that no one wanted him, and only found because a dog barked. She picked up her phone. "Detective Ruiz, we're not just looking for a janitor anymore." She paused. "We're looking for a man who knows how to disappear, who's done this before." Another pause. And we might not be the only ones too late. Noah had survived. But how many hadn't? It began with a whisper. Just one. Officer Ava Carter had returned to Hopewell Medical Center as she had every evening that week, Shadow trotting faithfully beside her. The halls were quieter now. The hospital staff knew them well. Some waved, others just nodded, as if recognizing the quiet gravity of what Ava and her canine partner had done. But none of it mattered as much as what waited behind the door of room 306. Noah. He'd come a long way in just a few days. The boy they'd pulled from a locked hospital room, silent, starved, traumatized, was now eating small meals, interacting with the nurses, and most importantly, reaching for Shadow every morning when he woke. Ava had been patient. She didn't push. She simply showed up, sat nearby, and let the boy set the pace. And on this day, something shifted. The room was warm with late afternoon light. Noah sat cross-legged on the bed, holding a small toy German shepherd Ava had brought him. Shadow lay nearby, one paw tucked under his chest, eyes half closed. The moment felt calm, almost fragile. Ava pulled her chair closer and asked softly, "Would you like to tell me about Uncle Frank?" Noah didn't answer right away. He stared down at the toy in his hands, stroking the soft fur behind its ears, just like he often did with Shadow. Then finally he nodded. Ava waited. Noah spoke without looking up. His voice was so quiet she had to lean in to hear. "He picked me up from the park." A pause. "I was supposed to wait for Mom." Ava blinked, heart thudding. "She said 10 minutes, but she never came back. Then Uncle Frank showed up. He said she sent him instead." Ava kept her expression neutral, though inside, her stomach twisted. She knew now that Frank Delaney wasn't Noah's real uncle. There were no legal ties. No records, no family connections. He had lied. Noah continued, his voice small and flat. "He bought me ice cream. Said he got a new apartment. With bunk beds, said we'd go there later, but we didn't." A long silence followed. Noah's grip on the toy tightened. "We went to the hospital. He said he worked there. Said he needed to grab something first." He looked up then, straight into Ava's eyes. "He said not to tell anyone. He said no one would believe me anyway." Ava swallowed hard. "Did he hurt you?" Noah shook his head, but his lips trembled. "He just left me there. Locked the door. Sometimes he came back, gave me a sandwich. But then he stopped coming." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "I thought I did something wrong." Ava reached out and gently touched his hand. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. What he did to you, it was evil. And I'm so sorry." Noah wiped his face with the sleeve of his hospital gown. "I was really scared. I thought I was going to disappear." Ava's voice broke slightly. "But you didn't." "Because Shadow found you." At the sound of his name, the dog lifted his head. His tail thumped the floor once. Noah gave the smallest smile. That night, Ava met with Detective Ruiz and Ms. Rayner, the social worker. She told them everything Noah had shared. And something became clear. Frank Delaney had planned this. He had watched, waited, picked his moment, lied to a vulnerable child and made him disappear without anyone noticing. Ruiz exhaled slowly. If Ava hadn't brought Shadow that day, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Meanwhile, back in room 306, Shadow remained by Noah's side. The boy had fallen asleep with his fingers curled gently in the dog's fur, breathing finally steady, peaceful. Ava stood in the doorway and watched them for a long moment. And in that stillness, she thought not about the evil they were chasing, but about the good that had found its way into that locked room. A bark, a bond, a beginning. Noah was talking, he was healing, and most importantly, he was no longer invisible. Some scars don't bleed. They don't bruise or swell. They don't show up on X-rays or hospital charts, but they live inside you quiet, heavy, and often invisible. Officer Ava Carter had seen her share of physical injuries over the years, broken arms, concussions, even gunshot wounds, but nothing broke her heart, quite like the weight she now saw in the eyes of two souls who'd once been strong and were now struggling to trust the world again. One was Noah, the boy found locked in room 207. The other was Shadow, her canine partner, hero of the rescue, and neither of them was the same. It started with small things. Shadow, once calm and composed in crowded hallways, now flinched at sudden movements. He growled low when strangers approached Noah too quickly. On patrol, he walked closer to Ava than usual, sometimes so close she nearly tripped. It wasn't aggression. It was fear. Overprotection. He had felt Noah's trauma that day. Not just smelled it, absorbed it. Like some part of the boy's pain had attached itself to him. Ava noticed it first during a routine check-in at the hospital. A doctor dropped a metal tray in the hallway. It clanged loudly, echoing off the tile. Noah jerked in bed. Shadow leapt up, barking, positioning himself between the boy and the door. It took 5 minutes to calm them both. Later that evening, Ava sat beside Noah. The boy was quiet, his fingers curled in Shadow's fur. "I think he's scared like me," Noah whispered. Ava tilted her head. "You think so?" He nodded. "He doesn't sleep unless I'm here. He checks the door at night, just like I do." Ava swallowed hard. "You protect each other, huh?" Noah didn't answer, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That night, Ava stayed late. She found herself staring at the hospital ceiling, wondering what came next. She had filled out countless reports, coordinated with detectives, talked with therapists. But one question refused to leave her mind. What happens to Noah when he leaves this room? Would he go to a shelter? To strangers? Would he be separated from Shadow, the one living being he trusted? A few days later, Ava got her answer. A meeting with Ms. Rayner, the social worker, changed everything. "Noah's case is complicated," Rayner said, setting a folder on the table. "No legal guardians, no confirmed relatives. He'll need a long-term foster placement while the investigation continues." Ava nodded slowly. "What if—" she hesitated. "What if that placement was me?" Rayner looked up. "You're asking to foster him?" "I'm not asking," Ava said gently. "I'm offering." There was silence for a long moment. Then the social worker smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that. The process wasn't instant. There were background checks even for police, home inspections, psychological evaluations, interviews, mountains of paperwork." But Ava didn't flinch. Every night she returned to the hospital. Every night Noah reached for Shadow. Every night the three of them healed just a little more. And when the approval finally came in a thick envelope stamped confidential, Ava didn't cry. But when she walked into room 306 and knelt beside Noah's bed with tears in her eyes and whispered, "How would you like to come home with me and Shadow?" Noah did. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around her and didn't let go. That night, for the first time in weeks, 3 souls, once fractured, slept under the same roof. 1 woman, 1 boy, 1 loyal dog. 3 hearts, finally learning how to beat again. Together. The house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, creaky floorboards, a yard with grass that never quite grew right, and a porch swing that had seen better days. But to Noah, it was a castle. To Shadow, it was territory. And to Ava Carter, it was finally home for all of them. The first night was quiet. Noah walked through each room like he was memorizing it, one breath at a time. The hallway, the kitchen, the blanket on the couch, the nightlight in his room that Ava had plugged in without a word. He never asked if he could sit on the couch. He just sat. And when Shadow jumped up beside him head on Noah's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, the boy let out the smallest laugh Ava had ever heard. It was short, but it was real. Adjusting wasn't perfect. Some nights Noah woke up screaming. Other nights he barely slept at all. He'd stand at the window, staring into the dark, arms crossed tight against his chest. Ava would join him without saying a word. Sometimes she'd sit. Sometimes she'd just stand beside him until his breathing calmed. Shadow never left his side. He would lie across the doorway, guarding the boy's room like a sentinel in the night. By the second week, something changed. Noah started helping in the kitchen, handing Ava napkins, stirring pancake batter. He asked to brush Shadow. He organized his tiny bookshelf 3 times and gave names to all his stuffed animals. Each day, a little more of him came back. His voice got stronger, his steps more confident, and Avaho had once sworn she didn't want children, not with her job, not in her world, found herself tucking him in at night like she'd been doing it her whole life. One Friday afternoon, they were out in the yard. Ava was fixing the screen door. Shadow was rolling in the grass like he hadn't a care in the world. Noah sat on the porch, sketching something in his notebook. "What you drawing?" Ava asked. Noah held up the paper. It was a family, a woman in a police uniform, a boy with messy hair, a big, loyal German shepherd in between them. Above the picture, in blocky, uneven letters, he'd written, US. Ava swallowed the lump in her throat. "You forgot one thing," she said, kneeling beside him. "Let me see that pencil." He handed it over, and in the corner, Ava wrote a name under the woman's feet, Mom. Noah stared at it. Then he leaned his head against her shoulder. Of course, it wasn't official yet. Legally, Noah was still in foster care. The system required time-home visits, psychological assessments, more paperwork. But Ms. Rayner, the social worker, was optimistic. "He's flourishing with you," she said during one visit. "Stable home, strong bond." Shadow's presence is a major factor. Honestly, this might be one of the fastest transition approvals I've ever seen. Ava nodded, trying to stay calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She wasn't just becoming a guardian, she was becoming a mother. Meanwhile, the case against Frank Delaney was gaining momentum. Though he had vanished after abandoning Noah, a search of his former apartment had turned up something new, a burner phone hidden in a vent. Detective Ruiz called Ava personally. "We pulled GPS pings from the last known location," Ruiz said. "He was in a motel 2 states over the day after Noah was found. Then he went dark. But he's still out there." Ava's blood chilled. Because as much as she wanted to move forward, there was still a shadow of a man out there who had stolen a child and might try again. She looked over at Noah, now curled on the couch with Shadow's paw over his lap, the two of them breathing in perfect rhythm. No. He wouldn't get near this boy ever again. Not on her watch. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the porch light flickered on, Ava made a silent promise to herself. This house may be small. This family may be unconventional, but it was real, and it would never ever be taken from them. For the first time in years, Ava Carter wasn't just fighting crime. She was fighting for something worth everything. A second chance. A healed heart. A boy who smiled again. And a dog who reminded the world what loyalty looks like. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of morning where the clouds hang low and the coffee pot feels heavier than usual. Ava Carter was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. Noah sat at the table, drawing with one hand and feeding bits of bacon to Shadow with the other. The TV played softly in the background. Morning news. Mostly weather, until it wasn't. Breaking news this hour: former Hopewell janitor Frank Delaney, wanted in connection with a child abduction case earlier this year, has been located in a roadside motel in rural Kentucky. Law enforcement officials confirmed his identity this morning, and Ava dropped the spatula. By the time she arrived at the precinct, Detective Ruiz was already waiting in the conference room, her phone buzzing non-stop. They found him 3 states over. Cheap motel, paid in cash, using an alias. But he slipped up, walked into a diner down the road, got recognized by a waitress who'd seen his photo online. Ava folded her arms. They have him in custody? Ruiz nodded, picked him up without incident. He didn't resist. He's being transferred back to the state. We'll get the full charges sorted: abduction, unlawful confinement, endangering the welfare of a child. Ava's jaw tightened, He needs to be locked away, forever. Ruiz looked up. We couldn't have done this without Shadow. Without you. Ava didn't respond right away, because all she could think about was Noah's face when he'd whispered, "He said, Mom didn't want me anymore." That evening, back at home, Ava sat Noah down gently on the couch. Shadow, sensing the weight in the air, sat protectively at the boy's feet. "Noah," she began carefully, "they found Frank. He won't be able to hurt you or anyone else ever again." Noah's fingers tightened on the edge of his sweatshirt. "Is he going to jail?" Ava nodded. "Yes, he's being charged. He'll never be near you again." "I promise." Noah was quiet for a long time. Then softly, "Does that mean I don't have to hide anymore?" Ava felt her chest tighten. "You never had to, sweetie." "But now you really don't." Noah nodded slowly, his eyes drifting to Shadow. "Can I tell him?" Ava smiled gently. "Of course." The boy leaned down, placed his forehead against Shadow's and whispered, "We're safe now." Shadow wagged his tail once. The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Frank Delaney pled guilty to multiple counts, attempting to avoid a prolonged trial and public scrutiny. Ava testified. So did hospital staff. But the most powerful piece of evidence wasn't a document or a video. It was a framed photo of Noah, of Shadow, and the note Ava had found in the hospital records after everything happened. A nurse had scribbled it on a sticky note. One bark, one life, one miracle. The courtroom fell silent when the photo was presented. And when the judge handed down the sentence, 5 years without parole, there wasn't a dry eye on Ava's side of the aisle. Back at home, life slowly began to feel like something close to normal. Noah returned to school nervous at first, but supported. Shadow earned a commendation from the department and, unofficially, retired from patrol. His new assignment? Watchdog, protector, best friend. The living room wall above the fireplace gained a new addition, a framed certificate that read, Shadow, Canine Officer, Rescuer, Family. Weeks later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Ava sat on the porch with her coffee while Noah played with Shadow in the yard. The boy laughed, really laughed as the dog chased after a bouncing ball, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. The sun broke through the trees. The world was still. Ava exhaled. It wasn't just over. It had begun. A real life, a real family, born not from blood but from bravery. From a bark, from a bond. In the end, justice had found its mark. But love had found its home. It didn't look the same. The walls were no longer pale green. They'd been repainted a soft sky blue. The lighting was warmer, almost golden. A small bookshelf sat in the corner, filled with stuffed animals, coloring books, and stories of courage. And the plaque on the door read simply, The Shadow Room, a place to heal. No one would have guessed that this room 207, was once a place of darkness. A place where a little boy sat alone for days, afraid, forgotten. Now it was something different. Now it was sacred. Officer Ava Carter stood quietly by the doorway, one hand resting on the shoulder of the boy who had changed everything. Noah, now 10, taller, stronger, and with a spark in his eye that had taken nearly a year to return, looked up at her and smiled. "You think it's okay if I go in?" Ava nodded. "It's yours more than anyone's." Noah stepped through the doorway, Shadow at his side. The dog, now officially retired, moved slowly but proudly, tail swaying like a gentle flag behind him. His eyes scanned the room the way they always did, as if checking for hidden pain even where none remained. The hospital had reached out months ago. The pediatric therapy team wanted to turn room 207 into a place for children dealing with trauma, a safe, quiet room where they could speak freely, play softly, or simply sit in silence without fear. But it was Ava who'd suggested the name. Shadow had saved a life in that room, and Noah had saved himself. They both deserved to be remembered. On the far wall hung a framed photo. It showed a moment frozen in time. A younger Noah, arms wrapped around Shadow's neck, eyes closed in peace. Ava stood behind them, smiling gently, equal parts officer, protector, and mother. Beneath the photo, etched in silver letters, one bark saved a life. One dog saw what no one else did. That afternoon, a small group gathered in the hallway. Nurses who had cared for Noah, detectives who had worked the case, hospital staff. A few families. Some came with children, some who had never met Noah but knew his story like a legend, passed down in soft voices and tearful eyes. Noah stood at the front. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't need to. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt with a cartoon German shepherd on the front. And in his hand he held a note. When Ava gently encouraged him to read it aloud, he cleared his throat and began. "When I was in this room, I thought I was invisible. I thought no one would come, but a dog named Shadow didn't forget me. He didn't walk by. He barked, loud enough for someone to listen. Now I want to be like him. I want to see people who are invisible and help them not feel alone. One day I want to become a canine officer. Just like Shadow, just like Ava." The room was silent for a beat. Then came the applause, as soft at first, then rising. Ava didn't wipe the tears from her cheek. She let them fall. She wasn't a hero in her own mind. But in that moment, seeing Noah stand tall, surrounded by people who once thought he might never smile again, she felt like one. That night, at home, Noah placed the hospital program on the mantel. Next to it sat Shadow's commendation medal and a small photo of the three of them taken on the first day Ava had brought him home. "Do you think they'll let me join the canine program when I'm older?" he asked. Ava smiled. "They'd be lucky to have you." Shadow barked once, then rested his head in Noah's lap. Some stories end in silence, others in justice, but this one, it ends in hope. In a room once filled with fear, now echoing with laughter. In a boy once forgotten, now planning his future. And in a dog who didn't just bark. He believed, sometimes, what saves a life isn't a miracle or a grand gesture, it's a bark at the right moment, a quiet hand reaching out, or the steady presence of someone who refuses to walk away. The story of Noah, Ava, and Shadow reminds us that healing doesn't come from haste, it comes from love, patience, and the courage to see the unseen. The deepest wounds are often invisible, but with compassion and connection, even the most broken hearts can begin to mend. No matter our age or season in life, we all have the power to be someone's rescue, simply by showing up, by listening, by caring. This story is a gentle but powerful reminder to trust our instincts, to lean into empathy, and to never underestimate the loyalty of a faithful companion, especially one with 4 legs and a knowing heart. Because sometimes, one small action can save an entire life,